Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Security Repo Podcast. We have a great show for you today, and this time our topic is aligned with something I don't know that much about, and that's digital forensics. What actually happens after a breach has happened? How do we catch the bad guys? And what are the steps that we can do to preserve evidence? It's a really interesting conversation, and our guest today is an expert in this field. And that's Alex Desmond, or Desi, as he prefers to be known. And if that nickname isn't enough of a clue for you, Desi is joining us all the way from Australia. Desi has a strong background in IT response, but has also spent time in the industry doing insider threat management and industrial incident response. He's currently one of the co-hosts of the Forensic Focus podcast, which I highly recommend you all check out and add it to your arsenal of weekly listening. Desi is also a pretty active member of the cyber community, participating in lots of events such as Capture the Flags, but of course, he still manages to find time to hang out with his dogs, head to the gym, and unwind with some gaming. So without further ado, I would like to invite my co-host, Dwayne McDaniel, to kick us off in our conversation about understanding digital forensics with Desi.
So maybe you could start with the same basic definition you gave me back in Baltimore, just super high level. What the heck is digital forensics?
What's really interesting about it is I think it kind of means like a lot of things to a lot of different people. So my background is in DFIR, so digital forensics and incident response, and digital forensics plays a role in incident response. But if you talk to a lawyer, or if you talk to someone whose bread and butter is just digital forensics, they'd have a slightly different opinion of what that means. But essentially it sits within the forensics field, like generally, of forensic sciences. And it's the method of preserving and investigating evidence to then generally provide that evidence into a court case. And I think that's probably what most people would be most familiar with in terms of what digital forensics is and how the practitioners go about it.
So that's the fascinating piece to me is like, is this a field that's just limited to law enforcement? Because that's where it typically gets clumped into. But how else is this being applied out there?
Yeah, so I guess that's probably where it has probably started. And again, like it's getting its definition from that forensic sciences background, which when you think of like DNA forensics, crime scene forensic investigation, the base principle is chain of custody with evidence, and that's applied to digital forensics. So you can see the kind of law enforcement background there. It does go further into things like corporate fraud. So you've kind of got like financial forensic investigations, and part of that is digital forensics. Like it may be you're going through a whole bunch of printed documents and you're going through like meeting records between people, but then you're tracing that digital record as well. And then things like when you think law enforcement, you've got cases where they may be doing mobile digital forensics to get information off mobile phones and that kind of thing. But it does have quite a broad reach. And where I saw it in incident response, I guess, was you would perform pieces of digital forensics to then support your incident response, and then also the report and providing that to the customer.
I'm curious. So, I kind of get an understanding digital forensics, coming from that forensics point of view. But what actually happens? As in, what do you actually do in digital forensics? Because, my brain goes from everything from kind of, looking at zeros and ones and going down to the actual root level of data, tracing stuff, to kind of using tools and following people on their traction through social media. Like, what actually is digital forensics? What do you do when you're kind of...
Yeah, so I guess that's where it gets a bit contentious with people's different definitions for it. At a base level, you're trying to explain a human interaction with something that has left digital footprints somewhere. So that's where all those things that you just said, and they all apply. But it's how can you use the evidence that you're looking at to then tell a story and prove that story for what happened in a way. And I guess the forensics piece of it is, can it be performed by multiple practitioners or experts in a repeatable fashion, and they can get the same outcome? So at a real low level technical aspect, when we talk about maintaining the integrity of the evidence, so let's say you're looking at a computer and someone had been committing fraud on that, you would take what's called like a sound forensic image of that computer, and as part of that you would hash that image. So when you're then investigating on that image, if you pass that image to another investigator, they could do the same hash algorithm, get the same hash, and they would know they're working off that same base evidence. If they use different techniques to get to the answers, the whole process of forensics is explaining those techniques to get to that final answer. But realistically, if you're trying to answer the same question, the answer should be the same. But if it's not, then you go back through that process, the kind of audit trail from the sound forensic image. You go through the audit trail of all your actions on how you got to that answer. And then someone else can come along and look at that audit trail of, well, what did they do? Did they do something wrong? How did each of those experts get to this answer?
It reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if you ever read Daniel Quinn, wrote a few books, the story of B, Ishmael, but that his definition of what makes us human is our ability to piece together clues to tell us stories. Like that literally gave us the advantage of, we can track game in the field. We can like follow streams into rivers and figure out that everything's interconnected. When we were talking back at in Baltimore at the conference, you mentioned that the entire industry right now, the entire field of digital forensics, is going through some pretty big changes. I was hoping you could highlight, what is changing, what's going on in the field, and what do we need to know for the future for those that might be looking to get into the field.
Yeah, so I guess for the if you're coming from a technical background into digital forensics, I guess that's the easiest. It's probably what's not changing the most. So the processes that you go through to do forensics and take images and perform your investigation and come up with answers, that's not going to change. What is changing around it is kind of like the definition in policy and law, and trying to come to a consensus internationally about forensic sciences as a whole. And as part of that, bringing in digital forensics. And they're actually using digital forensics as kind of like the pillar to say, for decades, we've been doing forensics this way, but each kind of silo of forensics is doing things slightly differently, and it's not a consistent way of doing things that makes it easy to explain it in a court of law. So one of the symposiums that's doing this is the IAFS. They've made a Sydney declaration, so they've got forensics experts in different verticals coming together to try and talk about defining forensic sciences in that legal sense, and using digital forensics as that kind of pillar exemplar to do that. But as they're discussing that, that'll further define digital forensics in that space.
It's really fascinating. You talked a little bit before. You mentioned that digital forensics is kind of perhaps increasingly being used in incident response and other areas. When you're doing digital forensics and incident response, I imagine that probably some of the core concepts stay the same, that you're taking an image of kind of perhaps a system that was breached at the time, so you get an idea of what's happening, and then you can do your investigation. But does it change a lot from when you're investigating kind of an active incident to when you're investigating something that kind of has happened? And can you see digital forensics being used more and more in, say, like an SOC, a security operations center, that's kind of doing live forensics? Are we getting to to kind of that kind of area, or are we still away from there?
No, so we're definitely approaching it. So I'll answer the first one around like how it changes between an active investigation and something that has happened that you come in, because that's something that I've dealt with a lot. During an active investigation, what you're always fighting against is the requirements of the company to get back up running and operational. Because usually the most common thing that we've all seen is ransomware. It's highly unlikely that the ransomware gangs are going to get prosecuted, and whether the company can chase them down and prosecute them. The consideration is, do you try and keep evidence because it is time consuming and it takes up quite a lot of space to take all those images, versus just do the instant response, figure out where the persistence mechanisms are, figure out what happened, whether they took anything, and then rebuild and move on. So you lose quite a lot of evidence while you're doing an instant response. So instant response and digital forensics almost counteract each other in terms of one needs to be rapid, but you lose a lot of evidence, whereas one is a little bit more time consuming. Versus something that has happened. So if you're looking for an insider threat case, you do want to take your time because you may be needing to build a case against someone who has stolen intellectual property. But you take your time a little bit more. You're careful not to overwrite evidence as you're looking through logs or you're on a system, and that's why you take images to prevent that.
Why aren't we able to kind of keep persistent records of images in all our systems so that we're not destroying evidence?
Yeah, and I guess that relates to that when you were talking about the SOC. So that comes down to, I think, storage space. So disk images themselves, if you take the logical image, isn't always the size of say a hard drive. So let's say a hard drive's 1 terabyte, but it's not full. Your logical image is only the portion of the image that's used. So it could only be, say, 200 gigs. But if you're in an enterprise environment and you've got, I don't know, 5,000 endpoints, you're multiplying that by 5,000 endpoints of logical images that you've then got to keep. And then how often are you taking images? So you may want to keep 5 images for forensic sake, let's say in an investigation. That's why I guess that information isn't collected. The way to then do it is figure out what's most important to the organization if you were going to get breached, have either the metadata or the logs, and then store that into a SIEM solution. So you have the data that's there that you think you will need. You may not have everything and you may miss some things, but at least you don't have nothing in your environment. So we definitely have improved, and we're moving towards a kind of system where there is more information and stuff that can be used in digital forensic space, and it's definitely logs is where we're going with that. It just may not be the answer all the time.
It's really, really interesting the way that you describe it. My brain immediately kind of goes to a physical crime scene where you've got a business that's being broken into,
yeah.
And the business owner just wants to clean everything up as fast as possible to get out the door and get customers back in.
Yeah.
And the people that are kind of wanting to create justice, track these people down, kind of come in and say, "Oh no, like all of this stuff has been totally destroyed. We don't have any evidence that we can use now because the focus was so much on the original process." I can really see how the two could work together, but also why they do seem counterintuitive. I think it's changed my perspective on it a little bit of how this whole operations work.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the interesting thing there is in that example, like on a physical crime scene, if the police get there, then they can stop the owner from doing that. Like they have the authority and the jurisdiction to say, don't touch that. This is now a crime scene. We're going to investigate. Whereas when instant responders or I guess digital forensicators come in, they don't have that authority. Like it's up to the business to invite them in to then do that investigation. So it's definitely, when you're in that situation, it's always hey, can we maybe hold off rebuilding all these systems because we want to collect some evidence. And then as an investigator, you're doing that trade-off where you're like, okay, let's do a quick triage to pull information rather than doing full disk images, because a full disk image might take 3 hours.
What's your opinion of what we just talked about?
Yeah.
We've just stated that in real life crime scenes, the authorities have the power to kind of force people out, to stop a business. And whilst I'm sure that's frustrating for people that just want to get going, that ultimately helps stop crime and put people away, and has a long-term effect that's better for society.
Yeah.
Should we implement something like that in security? Let's say that you've somehow got the magic keyboard that can implement some policies that affect organizations in Australia or around the world. Should we, from your perspective, implement more controls and ability to stop businesses from I guess operating for a period of time after they've had a breach?
Yeah, so I think in some and this is the problem, is that it's so broad with the different types of attacks. I think in some cases and in some countries, so I don't know this for sure, but I would say in the US, like if a company had financial crime and it was suspected that a US citizen was doing it, then say someone like the FBI could probably come in and stop that company operating while they did an investigation. The issue with some of the investigations that you do is that it's like Russian ransomware criminal gangs that are doing it. So there's very little that authorities could do. You're stopping a business and it's quite damaging to a business to have such a big impact like that they almost go under with just doing the incident response itself. If authorities then came in, they were like, look, we're shutting down for 10 weeks to do a full investigation, that would pretty much put the business under. People would lose their jobs. So it's that trade-off of, are we going to get a conviction? Who is it? What kind of incident it is? Yeah. It's a tough one. Like, as an investigator, I'd like to say for sure, like, I love investigating. I love trying to figure out what's happened and who's done it. But realistically, it's probably not something that we'll get to.
So I want to pivot a little bit to something else future looking, and that is the role of machine learning, AI, Chat GPT in this space. We've never been at a level where evidence can be manipulated or created. Is there a worry of that going on right now, that, deep fakes and machine generated things are going to play a role or something you need to worry about?
Yeah, 100%. It's definitely, it's something that we've explored a lot on our podcast. The deep fakes is worrying. The ones that we're trying to chase down now, and I think it was mentioned in one of the talks at the conference that we were at, Dwayne, they were discussing voice deep fakes and how that was used to defraud companies. So criminals were pretending to be CEOs and calling up the finance department and go, hey, we need like $250,000 transferred to this account. And then as soon as it hits that account, it just disperses into 20 other accounts as soon as that's done. And I think we'll see more of that. I know in Australia, we're seeing at least a shift in accessing our government data is its voice recognition to access that data. Now, that houses superannuation, kind of like other accounts, like the government app is then linked to ATO and other kind of accounts. So there's been ATO. ATO is the Australian Tax Office. Sorry for the acronym, but the tax office, like your yearly tax returns and that kind of thing. I think if a criminal was targeted enough to try and target individuals, then using that deepfake voice is a potential way to get around that biometric, or supposedly biometric security that is being implemented. So 100%, like it's definitely worrying. If they can figure out how to do it at scale, then it's going to be a lot worse. Yeah.
The other story from that talk you mentioned, where several banks have implemented this as a way to access your account. And on the surface, I totally get it. Like, it's a biometric, it's convenience. If you're dealing with an aging population, that's just the easiest way, because they're never going to remember a password, like set up a bunch of security questions, but other voice, we can trust that. And it seems like now, absolutely not. We can't.
Yeah. And it's a tough balance, because it's like you said, aging population, it's easier for them to use it. It's also an accessibility feature for someone who potentially maybe can't use it. Like voice activated computer programs have been around for a long time and gave that accessibility. If we implement that into security now, then someone potentially can abuse that. And you're like, it's unfortunate that the people who will get hit by it the most are probably the most disadvantaged within society. And that's really the sad part, because they're using these features because they think it's really safe and secure. But yeah, then they're falling foul of it.
I was just going to say, I really hope that all the cyber criminals that are focusing on like deep fake and things like that switch their attention over to making fun videos. Watching Joe Biden explain Simpson memes is one of my favorite things that has come out of.
My favorite is I think it's like Biden, Donald Trump, and Barack Obama playing like Modern Warfare, and they're just like talking shit in the chat. Oh man, that was so funny.
God, we've come a long way. We've come a long way since the days of I lived in Australia for a while, and I remember trying to call up Telstra, and sitting there, it's like, which department do you want? They'd like wouldn't recognize you. Yeah. Now you can hardly tell the difference between, is it the president speaking or is it some Russian troll that's controlling him on the, and I saw deep fakes there that on Twitter, I was on Twitter and I saw these images of Donald Trump getting arrested. And I was like, oh shit, Donald Trump got arrested. God damn. Then they're so fake. And I'm like, they look so real. It is scary that, and these were created by, they weren't even being really used to create fake news. They were kind of being used as a bit of a joke. But I was just like, this is so easy to create this stuff that looks so real. And you could absolutely convince people that this is real and get them to kind of riot or protest in this example.
Yeah.
And so many other things. It's, I think it's really going to play a part, and digital forensics is going to have to play a part in being able to detect what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that happens. I mean, right now it's not quite good enough. It's good enough to trick you for a little bit, but if you investigate, it's fake. There's certain telltale signs, not blinking. But I mean, how long? We've come a long way in the last 5 years. Where are we going to be in another 5 years?
Yeah, it's one of the things we've looked into, and I guess there's models out there that will try and detect deepfake, like thinking about videos and photos and that thing. They do really well on a trained set. So if the background or some part of the photo that's been used in the deepfake is there, it does really good at kind of picking that out because it has that kind of information in its data set. And this is that AI machine learning that's going through this. But if it's something completely new and it's really well done, it does a really hard job at that. And there was a paper that I was reading a while back, and I'm not sure whether it still applies because this was probably like right at the beginning of all this, but it was saying that humans are still the best at detecting once they've been trained. So it's not pull Joe Blogs off the street, they'll be able to detect a deep fake, but someone who is invested in kind of learning what the telltale signs are and the intuition that humans have do a really good job at picking out deep fakes from new data sets rather than trained sets. But it kind of, they couldn't really explain it in a scientific way of why humans are good at it. It's just one of the mysteries of, I guess, why we're still in the loop for a lot of things, right? Like we have good intuition. We take context and make intuitive leaps that computers can't do yet. So,
yeah, I mean, it's kind of like explaining how your face is different to Dwayne's, apart from the beard and all of that. You can see a face and you know that it's a different person. But I mean, most of the components are all there. You got 2 ears, you got a nose, teeth, see it all. But a face, like, why? How do I know that you're different? When we look at we could look at 2 golden retrievers and be like, no, that's the exact same dog for sure. It is interesting how we do that. we're coming to the end of the podcast. It's been really fascinating. I think there's a lot to kind of dive in from here. Do you have any fun stories that you can share about any investigations that you've had that have kind of interesting outcomes or touch on anything? Is there anything that you've kind of come through in your career that stands out as an interesting story?
There is one. So I was doing a fraud case for it was like a big international company. There was like a whole bunch of falling out between the board, and there was some insider trading accusations going around, and they had all this information leak. So there was like some insider threat pieces going with it as well. But the guy that we were tracking was really good at covering his tracks, but he was Googling all these places to meet reporters right near the headquarters. So we were like tracking the movements that way. And then we ended up getting him. He signed into his Google account on his work computer, and then it synced a whole bunch of bookmarks that had kind of like incriminating stuff. I don't know where it went because I kind of just did the investigation, then handed it off. But that was a pretty cool one because it was like an active investigation that went to a court case, and it was trying to like find mistakes that someone was doing, and they were pretty good at hiding their tracks. So that was a fun one.
It's really interesting, like that just all that information being synced onto another computer, and that's what gets you down. You've been so careful separating everything, doing that.
Yeah.
You log into one account, and I guess we just don't realize how much data is being stored on these services like Google. That as soon as you link it up with, yeah, it's scary. Well, Desi, just before we go here, you've mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned you guys have a podcast. If people want to kind of learn more about this topic, where can they go to kind of maybe hear from you or learn a bit more about digital forensics in general? What are some resources that you can share on that topic?
Yeah. So I'm on the podcast Forensic Focus. Sai is the co-host with me. He's based in the UK. It has a website as well. So there's a whole bunch of like free digital forensic resources there. We focus on digital forensics, e-discovery, and kind of the law enforcement side of things. If you want more of the kind of like instant response digital forensics thing, SANS puts out white papers as well that has a lot of stuff. The conference that we went to puts out the papers. There's kind of like, if you want to go more the academic route, there's also another one called DFRWS, which is another conference, and that's run in the US, the UK, and in Australia as well. And they also have free academic papers that have been published as well. So plenty of resources there. I'll shoot through you guys the links as well. So if you want to chuck them in show notes or anything like that as well, people can kind of go from there.
Absolutely. That'd be great. And those links will be in the show notes, so make sure you check that out. Dwayne, any final words before we press the big red button?
I just want to say thanks for being on here. I know coordinating between 3 time zones is a little tricky, but we're very happy we made it happen.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me, guys.
Not just 3 time zones, 3 continents. Like we've got a pretty good representation of the world right here.
Yeah.
Well, people might not know where we all are. I'm in Chicago, Illinois.
Yeah, I'm in Queensland, Australia.
And right now I'm in Paris. So yeah, we're covering a bit of ground here.
Truly global community.
Thanks again, Desi, and hopefully we'll have you back on the show at another time.